The next advance in human-computer interaction is starting. Augmented interfaces where our machines reach out into the world are arriving, but they're being met by a world that is filled by things that are fundamentally ill-adapted to logic and information processing as we know it. For example, us. We're experiencing this exponential ramp-up, not only in computer power, but more interestingly, the amount of power those machines will use to adapt to us. Are we ill-adapted? Yes. Take, for example, having 10 fingers. 10 fingers led us to a base 10 numeric system, whose deficiencies for our information age are hardly noticed. Consider the first electronic relay or switch, the precursor to today's electronic circuitry, was invented in 1835 by Joseph Henry. About 20 years later, George Boole wrote a book that we know as The Laws of Thought, which introduced what we now call Boolean algebra. But it took about another 80 years until 1937 for Claude Shannon, while working on complex electronic circuits, to notice that Boole's algebra could be applied to the design of circuits to make it methodological and not ad hoc. So, for over 80 years, a period during which the light bulb, the telephone, motion pictures were invented, Boolean algebra could have been used to efficiently program electronic switches, but we didn't know it. Why did it take so long? Well, it has to do with us having 10 fingers. It led to a base 10 numeric system causing us to miss patterns that are obvious in binary, or the similar octal base that we'd use if we only had 8 fingers, or if we didn't use our thumbs when we counted. Not seeing these binary patterns set back information processing quite a bit. Oh, you know, we can think in binary terms when it comes to dichotomizing based on our prejudice and our stubbornness. We have strongly held opinions that we treat like possessions, either strongly held or rejected, you know, conservative, liberal, science versus religion, and some places science versus art, although hopefully not here at TED. We're just not adapted to the information age in a fundamental way. But as computer power grows exponentially, we have to use a greater portion of that power to make the computers adapt to us. Well, actually, at the very beginning, we didn't have to worry about computers adapting to us because they were humans. In the 1930s, when Claude Shannon was rediscovering the power of Boolean algebra, the WPA launched the Mathematical Tables Project. People essentially sat inside for loops, calculating exponential, logarithmic, and trigonometric functions all day long. Out of work mathematicians. Imagine your work for the day being a list of numbers that you could now calculate in a few moments using a spreadsheet. And we think like a full inbox is tedious. The 1930s are the midpoint between 1854, when Boole came up with his algebra, and today. And you know, exponential curves, when they start, go very slowly at first. Claude Shannon, while he was rediscovering Boolean algebra, worked for a man named Vannevar Bush on the differential analyzer. The differential analyzer was an analog computer with gears and cogs that added numbers and ran in parallel. And it simulated differential equations. It was used during the Second World War to generate artillery tables. These tables had to take into account the spin of the shell, the rotation of the Earth, the speed of the wind, the temperature, and both the absolute altitude and the relative difference in altitude between the shell and its target. There's a lot of math there. Human computers were still used for other World War II calculations, such as those for the atom bomb. We've started now using machines to predict the physical world. But Van Bush invented, or at least imagined something far more amazing for his time, hypertext, the links that form the World Wide Web. Our pent-up desire to have machines perform repetitive information-oriented tasks for searching and retrieving documents led Bush to imagine a machine called the Memex. There it is. It was never built. It was undoubtedly influenced by the amount of paperwork he had to do as a $1-a-year man during the Second World War. It's an indexed and mechanized microfilm display with links, a machine that perfectly fit the future of that era. We now want our machines to organize our information. Just a few years later, during the Cold War and with the advent of Boolean algebra for circuit design, the semi-automatic ground environment, or SAGE, computers appeared along with their radar displays. Now, instead of rows of numbers, computers are presenting their information graphically in a way that models the items being measured and their location. And the data can be manipulated with a light gun. But the thing about this slide I really want to point out that is just so great, it just shows how irrational and ill-suited us humans are, is right there. A cigarette lighter and an ashtray. I just can. Our machines are now explaining the real world to us visually while we light up. A few years later, after that, 1963, a student of Claude Shannon's named Ivan Strutherland wrote up a program called Sketchpad. It was widely considered to be the first appearance of computer graphics. Objects were created in the computer's memory, displayed on the screen, and manipulated with a light pen. These objects don't exist anywhere except in the computer's memory, the display, and in the mind of the user. So our machines are now allowing us to create and manipulate objects that came solely from our minds. Sketchpad, in turn, influenced Douglas Engelbart's 1968 online system. It's called Online. It had a keyboard, a mouse, a graphical display, networking, and video conferencing. Here's the hierarchical display of the file system taken from a video. Okay, our machines are now representing their internal state to us in a tangible way. And there's also the mouse pointer there. Here are the input devices used for online. The device on the left is a corded keypad. There's 5 buttons that could be pressed in any sort of combination to get up to 32 commands or characters. This didn't catch on, not like the cigarette lighter. But the rest looks just like a computer from today, just a little clunkier. The keyboard and the mouse just look like bulkier versions of those on my computer. Except for the exponential reduction in cost and increase in performance, we're not that far away from the way we interact with computers now. In 1968, we're about 3/4 of the way between George Boole in 1854 and now. And the exponential curve is slowly getting some mass underneath it. Over the next few decades, we know what happened. So exponential increases in computing power and wired and unwired networks to connect us to each other and the world's information. Increasingly portable computing devices with high-resolution displays that could be taken anywhere. Also, our machines slowly started becoming more humane and to reach out into the real world. Remember the first time you saw a satellite imaging program or a mapping program and you zoomed into your house? Then came GPSs with graphical displays. And all of a sudden your location, possibly along with guidance on where you should be going, were presented to you in a display that mirrored your surroundings. A few years ago we got interactive astronomy applications where you could just point the phone or tablet to the sky and get the answer to what you're looking at. And simpler things like being able to refill your medicine just by taking a picture of the bottle. There's also Shazam and SoundHound, recognizing the audio and playing that tune. You can even sing along, all from the sounds from your surroundings. But none of these things are truly augmented. They still either act on their own or instruct you passively. They don't reach out into the real world. So, what would an augmented interface look like? Well, I'm sure you've all seen these little puzzles. Okay. This is a tinier version of one. And I'm going to show you. Okay, start the video. How it goes. Oh. Same puzzle. The little red arrow shows you where to twist. And across the top is your position towards solution. it's all solved. Now I won't leave well enough alone. I'm twisting it back so you can see the display. Move away from the solved position. And I finish up. Okay. Okay. People love to demonstrate computers doing things that supposedly clever people are good at, but really aren't that useful. We had Deep Blue beating Kasparov, and somebody in an earlier talk mentioned Watson winning at Jeopardy. But you see, puzzles and Jeopardy and chess, they're recreations, okay? We don't need help with those, unless you want to cheat. If you want to cheat, you can use these things. What we really want are tools to help us with mundane tasks, such as changing the time on an appliance or setting a watch, showing us how to add ink to a printer or to clear the paper jam, or understanding the little marks on the steering wheel stalk of your rental car when you're driving along and you look in the rear view mirror and you notice the rear wiper is going and you don't know how to turn it off. Soon, along with manuals, your appliance or car is going to come with an augmented application to guide you along. Okay, this is an example of an application to set the time on a microwave oven for daylight savings. Follow the numbers. It's not as much fun as a puzzle, but it's more useful. Okay, Google Glass. Everyone here has been following the news. You know about Google Glass. You know about privacy concerns and all that. It will, and it's Google. You'll have search and all the things you expect from Google, translation, maps, and all that. But it will also come with an augmented interface. And the demos they show of it show a woman in a taxi cab going into a new city, and the hotel she has with a little label over where she's going. They also show people skydiving and performing on trapeze. However, I don't think they're going to catch on in a big way. The backlash is starting before they're even available with privacy issues and things like that. This is a guy named Steve Mann. If anybody can claim to have built the Google Glass predecessors, it's this guy. You notice how they're getting smaller and smaller. And I just personally think wearing Google Glass in most social situations will be a little awkward. Maybe around the office where you need it. By the way, I would love to get the 1980 version and turn the camera around and just video the people's reaction to me. Sixth sense. Okay. Another thing that people are suggesting is we can use these augmented interfaces to retrieve information about the people we meet. The scene above is from the TED Sixth Sense presentation, showing a student's personal information being projected so the Sixth Sense user can address them by name. I cannot imagine people being fooled by this or liking this. Remembering someone's name shows true personal interest. Meeting someone for the first time is an important experience, best left unmediated by a computer. I mean, do you really want people going around with these things on their head, greeting you with all the sincerity of a telephone marketer? To be fair, the Sixth Sense team thinks this is kind of controversial. Speaking of controversy, over the past few years, there's been a lot of news and controversy about the US using military drones controlled through remote and augmented interfaces for surveillance and for assassination. But what about privately owned drones? Quadcopters with cameras and remote controls that can be purchased for a few $100s are available, and the software that make them semi-autonomous is being developed. It probably wouldn't take a whole lot of engineering to add a weapon. Right here in Chicago, about 100 years ago, when Frank Baum was writing The Wizard of Oz, he wanted to give the Wicked Witch of the West this power to scare everybody in Oz. Does everyone know what it is? Yeah, an army of flying monkeys. It was controlled by putting on a cap. Well, an equivalent army of quadcopter drones controlled through a head-mounted display with cameras and guns would today have a hardware cost comparable to that of a high-end sports car. And forgive my morbidity, but within a few years, we're probably going to hear about crimes being committed by private citizens using drones, augmented interfaces. Finally, will all this augmentation make us dumb? You know, we do lose certain skills as technology progresses. People of an earlier generation who were into technology had a much better number sense than we do because they spent a lot of time calculating and using slide rules and logarithms. But to move on, our knowledge has to expand, so it has to be shallower because we're finite. However, it's going to be easier to dig in because we have things like the internet. This concern is hardly new. Here's an admonition from Plato, the Greek guy like 3,000 years ago. An admonition about the new information technology of his time, writing. It will implant forgetfulness in their souls. They will cease to exercise memory because they rely on that which is written, calling things into remembrance no longer from within themselves, but by means of external marks. Sound a little familiar? Yeah, we augment our memory and minds through note-taking and reading. I really hope these next advances in augmented interfaces will help free our minds so we can spend less time having to dig in to deal with the trivial and frustrating matters of life, so we can spend more time with our imperfect minds and our 10 fingers on the important matters that no one seems to be attempting with a machine, the place where our creativity starts, our daydreams. Thank you.